welcome to Coaching with Tally, in a series all about uncovering the masterpiece that you already are, getting you in a place where you stand very solidly in who it is that you've been made to be and get to overflow that into the lives of other people. Get you in a place of confidence where you can walk into any room just grounded and centered and confident in who you are and what you're bringing. Up-leveling that place of self-esteem, self-worth, and get you really, really solid in your own identity of who you are and what it is you bring into the world. My name is Tally. I'm a life and personal development coach, and I have the honor of working with leaders to create lives of overflowing impact in the world that are centered in a place of joy. Really all about getting you aligned to who it is you most truly are, get you firing on all cylinders. We look at every area of life and really get you into this place of overflow, having created a life that you love living. So today we are talking about the power of boundaries. So when you know what your boundaries are, when you are able to, without apology, set and communicate those and be consistent with them, it sets you up for so much. It sets you up for walking in more self-esteem. It sets you up for really trusting yourself. It sets you up for healthy relationships. It's a precursor to you really getting to live a very full, intentional life where you are clear on what you're a yes to and clear on what you're a no to. If you're gonna be in any kind of leadership, it's super essential for you to get clarity around what are your boundaries and how to communicate and protect those boundaries. So we're gonna talk today a little bit about what does it look like to, maybe what are the areas that you need to have a boundary that you're not super clear on. So identifying really what a lack of boundaries looks like, where you might need to implement some. And then we're going to talk about the how to create those in your life, how to have them, some tips for you. And I want you to be able to walk away from this video with clarity around one place in your life that you need to establish and implement a boundary, and how you can actually really integrate that into your life. So some signs that you might need to have a boundary. So places where you don't have strong boundaries and what that looks like, help you identify that. So if you have find yourself struggling to say no and then regretting it later, that's clarity that there might be a place where there's a boundary needed there. Being overly apologetic, so you taking on too much responsibility for things that are out of your control. Feeling indebted to others even when you're not. Often we can feel that, especially if we're high empathy people. If we really are keyed into the emotional needs of other people, this can be a place for us that we can grow in, is having more boundaries. If you find an imbalance in any of your relationships between receiving and giving, like there's not a pretty good balance. If you're either somebody who's taking a lot, you might need to set some boundaries and say, I actually can take more responsibility for this and not put this dependence on somebody else to take care of things for me. Or if you find yourself giving a lot more than you receive, you probably need to have some boundaries and let this other person rise up in their own responsibility for some things. So having a really healthy balance between how much you give and receive is one of the keys to having a healthy relationship. That's one of the things we look at in my life wheel assessment around relationships. So a really good balance of giving and receiving. Taking on too many responsibilities in your life and then feeling resentful for it later. So when you find yourself being kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't do this, and you're kind of resentful for something it is that you actually said yes to, that you committed to, that might be a place that, like, if you could go back, putting a boundary in there and saying no to some of those things would be a good thing. And so sometimes we don't realize that until it's, we're looking back on it. But those are really good times to reflect and look at, okay, I'm in this position here. I'm feeling resentful because I said yes to something that really was not a yes for me. I just felt like I should do it, or I felt guilty saying no, or I didn't want to disappoint, or I really want this person to feel like they can depend on me, or a whole myriad of reasons we don't set boundaries that we need to set. But when we get to these places where we feel resentful, it's a wonderful way to kind of take stock of, really evaluate what boundaries could look like for you, what might be more supportive for you, so that you don't get into these places where you feel resentful. So think of a time when you've communicated a boundary, or think of a time when you haven't communicated a boundary and you wish that you would have. So look at some of those places where you might be feeling resentment right now, or you feel out of balance, that kind of giving receiving thing we talked about. Maybe just identify one area that feels the most challenging for you, that you're like, oh, I think this is a place I need to have a boundary. It might be with yourself. Maybe you're not giving yourself permission to need something that you're needing. You're not allowing for it. Or maybe it's in relationship with another person where you just need to say, hey, I cannot do this thing that I know you would like for me to do. This isn't either my job, or I'm keeping you from stepping up into something that really is going to support you more, or like I honestly just don't have the bandwidth for this thing. I need to say no to this at this time. So looking at where you have not communicated a boundary that you need to have one. So I really want you to walk away from this video with something tangible, a place that you're like, I need to have a boundary in this area. So I want to give you a little analogy. I think this was really helpful for me. Because sometimes so I'm a number 2 on the Enneagram. If you know Enneagram, that's like helper. I'm high empathy. I'm very keyed into the needs of others. I'm a firstborn. So taking on a lot of responsibility is just kind of part of what I grew up in, and I like it. I actually like taking a lot of responsibility. That feels good to me. I found a lot of approval in that growing up. So there are a lot of contributing factors. If you grew up in any kind of addictive home, which I didn't, but I think being a firstborn, so your birth order matters in that, your personality type matters, the environments, work environments you've been in, the relationships, romantic relationships you've been in, and what those dynamics were. There are a lot of contributing factors in what it is that we take on and our either ability to have great boundaries or our need to develop that. There's just a lot of contributing factors. And I think all of us in life can get better and better at this. I think this is an ongoing journey. So wherever you are in that journey, I want to encourage you with this. This analogy was really helpful for me. So if you're walking downtown, just imagine walking downtown and you walk past a building and you notice that the lock on the door, there's like, it looks broken and the handle looks broken and it looks like you can just walk in the building. And then you look up and you notice there are a couple of windows that are out and that haven't been fixed. And you're like, your assumption would probably be there's not anything of great value in that building when you can just get into it that easily. Does that make sense? So when there are not maintained boundaries around things in your life, it communicates a lack of value. And you feel that internally, like at a subconscious level, you feel that, and other people who are close to you feel that as well. So there's a perceived lack of value when there is a lack of boundaries. And so that's incentive, at least it was for me, to really up-level my engagement with looking at my boundaries, maintaining them, getting really clear on what they need to be, communicating them well to the people in my life, and then being consistent with those. So boundaries equal value. So that was really, really supportive for me. So it's as counterintuitive as that can sound, having boundaries that are set and respected is not actually something that's limiting, it's something that's freeing. Because when you're clear on what your boundaries are, you know very clearly what you're a yes to and what you're a no to. And then you can be full on intentional with the things that you're a yes to. There's just only so much bandwidth that we have as human beings. There are only so many hours we have in a day. There's only so much energy that you have access to. And so being really clear on what you are all in on and what you are not is very, very supportive. And it actually communicates to people a sense of like self-worth, self-esteem. It'll communicate that to you internally, and it'll communicate that to other people. So how do we do it? How do we set boundaries? How do we get clear? We got some clarity there on where you might need a boundary. Now let's look at how do we actually go about setting them. So knowing what your boundary needs to be, is identifying it is the first thing. So identifying where you need a boundary. And again, any place that you find resentment in your life is a direct indicator. It's like a light on that dashboard. When you have resentment, you're like, hey, okay, I need to have a boundary here. I'm overextending in some way that doesn't feel in alignment for me. So resentment is a place for a boundary. So figure out what that boundary could be that would bring that into alignment. Give yourself permission to just have a boundary. You have to have boundaries in life. You can't possibly say yes to everything that there is to say yes to. So give yourself permission to know what things are aligned with what feels good right now in this season, and give yourself permission to have that boundary. So identify it, permission to have it, and then being able to communicate that assertively. And assertive doesn't have to mean that you're unkind. It doesn't have to mean that, you know, it's like with force. It just means that you are really clear and direct about what you can and can't do, and what feels good to you and what doesn't, and what is aligned for you and what isn't. And then be consistent with sticking with that. So if it's something you're just giving yourself, or if it's something with somebody else, consistency with that boundary is really, really key. So set yourself up for success with it. Maybe share it with a coach or a friend that you can have some accountability around that with. Maybe it's setting something up in your calendar for that. You know what the boundary is, so you'll know how to apply it a little bit better. But do something that sets you up for consistency with that thing. So know what your boundaries are. You can look for resentment. That's a good place to look for a need for them. Permission to just have the boundary, communicate it assertively and directly, and then be consistent with how you implement that in your life. So like most things, this isn't something that we're just born knowing how to do. It takes time to practice, but it is 100% worth the effort. It will have you standing in a greater place of self-worth, self-esteem, and really standing in the masterpiece that you already are. Blessings. If you have not heard it yet today, you're so loved. And we'll be back again tomorrow with another tip on leaning into the masterpiece that you are. Blessings.